Hi, good afternoon or morning, or whatever time zone you might be in joining us. I am Nicole Havelka, and I am your mindful change coach. And we are doing Defy the Trend live today. And I am so lucky that Leslie Owens has joined me and us by extension today. We are going to be talking about saying no, as we are this whole month. In this case, saying no to hectic weeknight meals and embracing like simple and just tasty and good ways to eat that you can actually do yourself fairly quickly. Uh, and you're like, wait, Nicole, why are you talking about this? You work with burnout and things like that. And this is something that comes up fairly often, especially from my clients who are parents or who are caregivers in some way, have to cook for groups in particular, although it comes up with other people too. But it's a source of stress for people because it's constant, right? People, we need to eat almost constantly. So especially little kids need to eat a lot. So that's what we're here for. But I'm going to turn it over to Leslie and let you introduce yourself and say more about who you are and what you do and how do you come to this teaching people about cooking.
Right. So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited to be here today. And yes, you are absolutely right about the burnout thing. And so, like most people, I started out a career thinking I wanted to climb the corporate ladder and be some kind of CEO. And what I realized sort of early on was that I hated being chained to a desk. I did spend over 10 years working for Disney. But when I left there, I decided that I still wanted to use my business brain, but I wanted to do something creative. So I went to culinary school, started my own personal chef business. Um, and then at some point, you come to realize you're watching all the chefs around you and you're watching them get new knees and new hips and shoulder surgery. And you think, ooh, maybe physically at some point, I might need to take some time off from this. Or around 2018, I decided I wanted to do some food writing. And I've been really lucky to be able to work with corporations and nonprofits and do, food writing for them. Nonprofits, newsletters and blogs and things like that. And I've done some really cool projects. I've gotten to run a couple of recipe contests. I've written a cookbook actually for a home healthcare company that sends caregivers into people's homes to cook or to help seniors who
Mhm.
are still living at home but need extra help. I wrote a cookbook for them to be able to cook at home with the seniors. And I also did a 10 recipe cookbook on foods you can share with your dogs for an animal nonprofit. That was fun. Um, but the teaching thing just came sort of naturally. I'm one of those people. I'm a lifelong learner. I think you are too. And if I find something that I think is cool, I'm going to tell everyone about it. And if they're going to listen, I'm going to tell you, or I'm going to tell them. So that's sort of how I fell into it. And now I do cooking demonstrations, cooking classes, healthy cooking classes for seniors for an insurance company. And I go about 5 times a month and I do those in addition to, you know, like I said, all you have to do is say food or cooking and I'm off. I'm going to just start. So.
I love it. Well, I love talking about food and cooking. I am not like a professionally trained chef at all, but I would say I'm a pretty accomplished home cook and I've loved to cook since I was really little.
Mhm.
Um, I was like making full meals by the time I was like 11 or something like that. I was one of those, I just liked it, honestly. So I would do it. And my mom was a pretty accomplished home cook too. So I learned from her. So I love this conversation and I want to help the folks who struggle with this, right? That this is a source of stress and it doesn't have to be as stressful sometimes as we make it out in our head to be. So speaking of stress, why should we let go of that hectic, especially weeknight meals?
Right, right.
Why should
So
we let go of that?
Right. So obviously, what cooking is about eating, but really there's two reasons why we cook. There's that cooking that you do, that sort of that relaxing zen. At some point we were all making, sourdough bread, When the weather turns cold, you want soups and stews, like that comfort feel. Sometimes you've had a stressful week and you just need to make a pan of brownies. Holidays and the food that we make at holidays that evokes those memories and those good feelings. That's one of the reasons why we cook. And studies have shown that cooking and particularly baking give us a mental boost. But then there's that other type of cooking where we're just trying to fill bellies, right? Bodies need fuel, and it can be really, really stressful. So it doesn't have to be stressful. And we all know what happens if you don't have a plan, if you wait until 5 o'clock to decide to start thinking about dinner. We get tired, we get stressed, we get hangry, right? We all know we get hangry. If you have a partner, or if you've ever had a partner, you start that conversation. What do you want for dinner? I don't know. What do you want for dinner? I don't care. How about we have this? Well, I don't want that. I thought you said you didn't care. Well, I don't care, but I don't want that. Right? You have that conversation and it goes on and on and on. And then, I don't know, somebody eats salad standing up at the counter, or not salad, but, cereal standing up at the counter. Um, so the key to avoiding that and avoiding the stress is planning. And you have to plan in a way that works for you. Now, there are some people are really great. Like, they're fabulous at meal planning. They've got boards in the kitchen with every meal that every person in the family is going to eat for the next 6 years, right? And everything is planned. We all know those people. It gives us stress. Maybe they have an app, they have an Excel spreadsheet. Like I said, they've got the calendar in the kitchen. Every single meal is planned out. But if you're not that type of person, the planning can be very, very simple. It can be as simple as you come home from the grocery store, you put the groceries away, and you write on the notepad on the refrigerator what you have available that you can cook. Like that, it can be that simple.
Mhm.
Because, we all know that sometimes you bring home the groceries and then you forget what you have.
Right.
So if you're not someone who wants to have meatless Monday and taco Tuesday, I like to be a rebel. If I want tacos on Thursday, I'm going to have tacos on Thursday. Right? So
Totally.
if I want tacos Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, that's what I'm going to do. But if you just make a list, prioritize the things that you need to make first, especially anything that's been left from the week before that needs to get used up. Put that first on the list. Then the next time you go grocery shopping, take that list off, write a new one.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's just about the planning can take off a lot of that stress, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, and I'm noticing that's great place to start talking about this planning meal and how do you let go of the stress of that. And I'm noticing that there are some folks watching live, which is really cool. If you all have a question, please drop that in for either Leslie or myself, probably Leslie. Drop that in. We'll answer it in the course of this if we can get to it, and or go back in there and we'll definitely answer in the chat section a little bit later. Just wanted to say, hey, thanks for joining us, and that we would love to hear from you. That would be great. Especially like what stresses you all out about meal planning and prep, and that might be a great way to actually. I'll give you that question. That's a better thing to do. So,
right.
what is stressful to you, and then maybe we may address it in the course of this anyway. So, take us a little bit more detail through like that process of planning your menu. Obviously the grocery shopping has to come in there somewhere, and then into preparation. Like what are some of the basic steps that you usually teach people? Because I know you do. This is your thing. Teach people how to do this.
Yeah. So in my family, we have a joke about we're eating one meal and we're talking about what we're going to eat for the next meal. Right. So that's kind of where it has to start. But it actually starts even sooner than that. If you are the main cook and meal planner and grocery shopper in your family, is what I do is before I even start my grocery list, because most people can make about 15 different things without a recipe. And actually that has fallen a little bit, believe it or not, in the last couple of years. even though we're all cooking more at home, I think that's funny that the number of different things we can cook has fallen. But at any given time, we're only making about 7 of those, which means we're eating the same 7 things over and over again. But it's because we go to the grocery store without a list, or we put blinders on at the grocery store, or we make that grocery list. It's really easy now with the grocery apps. They tell you what you buy. So you just buy those same things over and over again, and you end up eating the same things over and over again. But what I do is at night when I'm watching my shows, that's when I make my lists. So before I even sit down, I look in the freezer, I look in the refrigerator and go, okay, what do I need to use up? That's where you start. Because we all know that we have found things in our freezer and thought, when did I even buy this? Right? Right.
Totally.
You go to that freezer and you think, when? I don't even remember buying this. So if you start and you just pick one thing, like one thing every week that's in your freezer or in your pantry. If you have a spice that you bought 3 months ago that you've never used because you pulled a recipe and you never used it, that's the perfect time, right? Just pull something and then start making your grocery list. So I make those meal plans in the evening when I'm watching my show. I take that quick glance. What do I need to use up? Then I flip through my store circular because I want to know what's on sale. Groceries are too expensive to not buy things on sale. And that's how I make my grocery list. We have this terrible habit, or have had this terrible habit, of deciding what we're in the mood for. Or, like I said, buying those things, same things over and over again. We're wasting a lot of money by not buying things on sale. So make your grocery list and figure out your recipes based on what's on sale and what's in those circulars. Are there things I can buy BOGO, buy one, get one, or things that I can use that I can buy in bulk that I can use in multiple recipes? So I usually only cook about 3 times a week. The rest of my meals are actually just about assembling what's already done. So for example, if I'm making a sheet pan dinner, which it's 110 degrees here right now. So I'm not doing a lot of oven cooking, but the majority of the year, I use my oven. So if I'm making a sheet pan dinner, I will throw in an extra pan of vegetables, or I'll throw in extra chicken, or I'll throw in a pan of bacon, so that I'm making those things. It takes me an extra 5 minutes to make those while I'm making tonight's dinner and throwing them in the oven. Bacon could find its way into BLTs for the next night, or breakfast for dinner the next night. Extra vegetables, I can make those into, a Buddha bowl, power bowl, a salad. They might make its way into a soup or a stew. Extra chicken, we can always use extra chicken, right? There are a million recipes. Enchiladas, those tacos, chicken salad, anything, chicken pot pie. Depends on the time of the year and what your family eats. But I think that the biggest mistake that people make when they're sort of meal planning is that they do batch cooking, because I do batch cooking also, where you make a double batch of something. Fall is coming. We're all going to be making soup. We're all going to be making chili. We're all going to be making stews of some kind. And what we do is we make a big, huge batch, and then we expect our family to eat it all week.
Right.
And inevitably, I hear parents are, they're like, oh, I spent all that time making that chili. And, unless you have like a house full of teenagers who are just going to come through like a tornado and wipe out everything in your kitchen, at some point the family is going to go, no, we don't want to eat that. So make a big batch of something and immediately take half of it and put it in the freezer. And if you do that once a week, now all of a sudden, after a month, you've got 4 meals you don't have to cook 1 week. Right? You could take a whole week off cooking almost. So that's really what I tell people. The other thing is, we make big pans of lasagna. Now, maybe your mother or your grandmother made big pans of lasagna because she had a big family. Right?
Yeah.
And lots of people love leftover lasagna, but I find most people, after 1 or 2 times eating lasagna, they don't want anymore. So rather than a huge pan, get the little 8x8 cake pans and
Mm.
make 2 small lasagnas.
Mm.
It's better to leave your family wanting a little bit more, you know, when they're like, where's the leftovers? And you're like, oh, I don't know. And bring it out 2 weeks from now than it is to throw that money away, because groceries are too expensive right now to throw away leftovers.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'm wondering if people out there have what are their things that they've learned to do, like along of what these like little efficiencies that people have learned over the years. I know one of the big mistakes that I made, and I've lived alone most of my adult life, other than
Right.
it's here and there. So it's a different equation than cooking for a group for sure,
Right.
um, which I do less often. But and I don't mind leftovers. I'm also one of
Right.
those people who will keep eating leftovers as long as I'm making things I really truly like, right, and that hold up well. One of the things I would do is that I thought I had to cook every day in
Right.
the beginning. Like there was I don't know why I thought. I mean, maybe because I had grown up with just more people in the house, so there's sort of more necessity for that. And because I'm an adventurous cook and I always want to try new recipes, which is again fine. But I found myself having so much extra food then
Yes.
that I was wasting a ton of food, which of course is wasting money,
Right.
uh, and bad environmentally and all of those sorts of things. So I learned over time that, like you, about 3 things a week is all I really need to plan for,
Yeah.
because I'll eat the leftovers from that. And plus there's often some little quick thing I can make here and there in the house anyway. But
Right.
I'm totally down with oh, I'm making this, or I'll make right now all the fresh sweet corn is in
Yeah.
season around here, and so I'll buy 6 ears of corn, which is way more than I can eat. But I
Right.
take it off the cob and I have it in the fridge right now, and I have 2 recipes I'm going to use. Like I
Mhm.
know what I'm going to make with that
Yeah.
corn, and it's
Yeah.
already processed. It's just a question of like making when I'm ready to make those meals.
Right.
I can make those meals.
Right. And because corn is really expensive, or is in season and really expensive where you are right now, and that's why I say shop the sales circulars, is because because the one thing that I tell people is shop in season, and people will say, well, I don't know, I'm not a farmer, I don't know what's in season. Well, you don't have to be a farmer. Shop the sales circular. Whatever is on sale or whatever is in season is on sale.
Yeah.
If you walk into your grocery store and the produce department, whatever is front and center in the produce department, that is what is in season.
Right.
So, right now, if the corn is in season, you take those 6 ears of corn you bought and you put them in the zipper bags or some type of sealable container. Even if you don't have time to make them now, if you just put them in the freezer,
Yeah.
you can make them another time. Because I guarantee you in January, you're going to be like, man, I would love some corn and, potato chowder right now because
Right.
it's freezing cold.
Right. It's so much better than well, at that point in the winter months, the corn you don't want from if it's in the grocery store at all, you don't want
You
it.
don't want it. No.
Right. It's pretty gross.
Yeah.
At that point, it doesn't taste yummy. Oh, I love that. I love that. So, here's a question I added to the list, because so even if you're planning meals for a family, which again is a little bit more work than for 1 or 2 people, what how can that be an act of self-care? Because it feels like and it is like an act of caring for your family, right?
Mhm.
um, how can we integrate things that make that a more pleasurable experience for the one who's the primary cook,
Right.
right?
So I saw this reel recently, and it was a dad, and he was home with the toddler, making the sandwich for lunch, and the toddler said, "Well, mom cuts it into 3 triangles." So dad cut it crossway, so it was 4 triangles, and the kid had an absolute meltdown because it was 4 triangles and not 3 triangles.
Right.
And the dad was he didn't know how mom did it. So of course I had to read through the comments, and a lot of people said, well, mom is cutting a V shape so that it makes 3 long triangles. They may not be even, but it's 3 long triangles.
Right.
But most of the moms said no. Mom is cutting it into 4 triangles and then eating that fourth triangle when the kid's not looking. because that's mom's lunch, right?
Right, right.
And I thought that's the most likely thing that's happening because mom has to eat too. But I think, when you're caring for others, and it can be especially hard when you have a family where this one won't eat this and that one won't eat that. And, maybe you think you like things spicy, but your family doesn't. Or, somebody's a vegan and somebody is, no, I want meat and potatoes. We don't have to eat anymore like our parents and grandparents ate. I give you permission to not make a protein, a green vegetable, and a potato or a starch, right? That is my gift to you. I give you that permission. Think outside the box. So what you need to do is you can't drive a car on an empty tank. And that's where cooking not just for your family, but yourself too is self-care. So what you really need to think about are deconstructed meals. Especially if you're making those multiple meals. So what you can do, especially because a lot of people are not only feeding themselves and their children, but also maybe parents too. So now you've got all of these different tastes. So this is where things like, like tacos and, fajitas and things like that, anything that's a deconstructed meal where everyone can make what they want out of the different parts. I have a chef friend, she makes these big giant salads. And instead of putting a salad in a bowl, she puts it on a big platter, or you could use a big sheet pan. And what you do is you put the lettuce down, and then if you're going to make, say, a Southwest style salad, you could put a pile of chicken. Then you put your pile of black beans, a pile of corn, a pile of onions, a pile of cucumber, a pile of tomato, of cilantro, of cheese, and then everyone can pick what they want. Mm-hmm. And you're not having to worry about this one doesn't, if there's one or two things, like if you like spicy, maybe put your jalapenos in a little bowl on the side. That way you're just making one meal instead of making 20 different meals. And it's so much easier than having to, make, the chicken and the corn for the little one. And then, dad wants it spicy. And it's just, it's so much easier, I think, to make stuff that's deconstructed, or to make a meal that you can then add something to. Last week in my membership, one of the things that I did was a beef and broccoli stir fry. And you sort of prepare all the parts separately, and then at the last minute add everything together. So I have a friend who's her 13-year-old doesn't like sauces of any kind, but that's okay because my friend could make the beef and the broccoli and the noodles, because it was served over noodles, could make them all separately for the 13-year-old and then put it all together in the sauce for the rest of the family. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's really what you have to think about when you're making meals, is how can I take this meal and deconstruct it so that it's just not all together, and that, that I can eat too.
Right. And making sure it probably is something that you would like and eat.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah.
For sure.
You can definitely account for all tastes without having to make a bunch more work for yourself.
Right. Not without making 14 different.
Exactly.
Or as many people, meals for as many people are as in the house, and using all of your pots and pans and making separate dishes. Exactly.
Yeah. It just hurts my heart when I watch people making, 3 or 4 different meals based on who's in their house.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So that you mentioned the beef and broccoli recipe that you were just sharing. Is there any other favorite recipes, either go-to recipes for you that you like, or ones that you've shared recently with some of your clients?
So, gosh, I mean, for me personally, at home, it tends to be like a protein in a pan sauce, a really easy pan sauce, just because they're fast and they're easy. it's 15 or 20 minutes and it's on the table. But a lot of people find those too chefy. And they really kind of are. They tend to be the kind of stuff that you find in a restaurant just because they cook quickly. That's why they're in restaurants.
Right.
Because it's something that the cooks on the line can do really quickly. It's ready in 15 minutes. You use a wine or a vinegar or something like that, and it's just ready.
Yeah.
But so I find that people don't like them very much. So I'm a big fan of what I call the like a low prep time. Now, I catch a lot of flack for this, but I say that the 5 ingredient meal is the big lie, because they either aren't very tasty, most of them, not all, but most, or they're not very tasty, or they're really unhealthy because they're filled with a lot of heavily processed ingredients.
Mhm.
So, what I pay attention to when I'm looking at recipes is actually the prep time. How much time am I actually going to spend making this recipe? I have an easy pesto chicken recipe that it takes me about 5 minutes to put together. And then I put it in the oven, and the oven does the rest of the work.
Mm.
And it's beautiful. It comes out of the oven. It looks like it was made in a restaurant. I can serve it over pasta. I can just eat it as is with a salad, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anything that has a very limited amount of time in terms of how much time I'm actually, spending hands on. I also make a lot of stir fries, but I'm balancing the amount of time that I spend, chopping,
Yeah.
because I've also found that there are a lot of people out there who don't like cutting.
Mm.
They don't like cutting vegetables. So I don't know if it's just that they're uneasy because they don't know how. They're afraid they're going to cut themselves, or I'm not sure what. So now with the stir fry recipes that I share, it's maybe 1 or 2 vegetables that you cut, but then other vegetables that you don't have to, you can get them pre-cut or, frozen in the bag, things like that. So
Sure, sure. I'm going to add a quick your mentioning of cutting things
Mhm.
is making me think of that. Like what uh because I have an opinion about this, by the way. So that's part of why I'm asking. So what is like a tool in your kitchen that like you couldn't live without? And I would say this, and again, this is because you were mentioning cutting. My chef's knife, which a number of years ago, I invested in like a more expensive, like heavyweight chef's knife. You don't have to do that, by the way, although they last forever. The nice thing, they seem more expensive and they are, but they last. I've probably had that one at least 10 years
Yeah.
and it's definitely holding up. But like I think that's really that and a paring knife are the only knives you need for the most part, unless you're carving things. I do have a carving knife I use like once a year,
Right.
but right. But those are the 2 knives that I go to most often. What are for you? What are the things that are sort of indispensable besides knives? Because I obviously took that already.
Right. So I would also add a good bread knife.
Yes, I have one of those too. Correct.
Especially if you have hard time. So I do have a tip though about knives.
Uh-huh.
So the big honing steel that everyone has, and that's what it's called, it's all a honing steel or a honing rod. That doesn't sharpen your knife. That actually realigns the blade so that it's straighter, but it doesn't actually sharpen your knife. What you
Mhm.
should be doing, if you are someone who uses your blade regularly, you should be taking it to someone professional to have it sharpened. If you don't know who that is, if you have like a restaurant supply store, they might have someone or be able to direct you. But one of the best places to have your knives sharpened are actually hunting and fishing stores, because
Thought of
hunters
that.
and fishermen
Of
have
course
to have sharp knives. Yeah.
they
So
do.
and there are
That
some
really has to be sharp. Those are really sharp knives, right?
yes, yes. And
Yeah.
you want a really sharp knife. You are actually less likely to cut yourself on a sharp knife than a dull one, and you're less likely to do serious damage on with a sharp knife.
Yeah.
So, and if you, I did have someone say to me, "Oh, well, we got really sharp knives and we kept cutting ourselves on them." Then my response was, "Well, then you just needed to learn proper technique rather than going out and buying dull knives." But anyway, so for me, here's a really good example. I saw another reel recently where a young mom was talking about it was the worst part of mealtime for her because she had to touch the chicken with her hands.
Hmm.
just to move it from one thing to like one from the package into the pan. And I picked up my tongs and I was like, gosh, if only someone made a tool that you could pick up your chicken with without having to touch it. So for me, I don't know why home cooks don't use tongs. I
Oh,
don't understand it. It is actually an extension of your hand. Um, I don't know, but professional chefs use them. Home cooks don't, and I don't understand it.
yeah, and they're not. I've only and I've cooked for a long time, but like I only recently have I gotten it for whatever reason like started using tongs more
Yeah,
often. In my kitchen, you're like they are an extension of your hand, and it's so much easier to like stir something around. Like if you're making a pasta and you want something like a sauce over it, like you do a couple of flips and you're done. Like
yeah,
it's so quick to use
yeah.
tongs rather than a even a spatula or spoons or things like that, which are
And they're
fine for
yeah.
jobs, but like that tongs work really well, and they're not expensive either. Like you can
No,
get
I buy
yeah
the really super cheap ones. The only
yeah
time that I don't use the really super cheap ones are on any of my non-stick.
sure
But other than that, I love the super super cheap tongs.
yeah
Um,
yeah. Or I even recently got some at Target that are like plastic on the tips, which have the risk of burning. There is that problem with the plastic, but I don't, I don't use them. Usually I'm using them really fast. Like I don't use those like for, stirring things. I'm not doing that. So
you
they're
can
like
get the ones.
$3 and I think I have three of them or something.
Yeah, you can get the ones with silicone tips, and those are
Oh,
even better because they are heat proof,
right.
and use those on your nonstick
Yeah.
pans. But yeah,
Right.
I very rarely actually. I have a good set of wood spoons. I have a good set of silicone spatulas. I very rarely use them.
Mm.
I use almost exclusively tongs. But yeah, it's if you could stick your hand in a hot pan, which as a chef I have been known to do, but
Most
you
people
know,
won't do that at home
I know
for
most
sure.
people won't do. It's because after if once you cook for a really long time and you cook every day,
Yeah,
I always I call them asbestos fingers. You just like
totally.
you just don't feel the heat.
Right.
You
I
just
agree. Have a pretty high tolerance for that
yeah
too.
yeah
But I had a friend once who said, I don't cook because I don't want to burn myself.
right.
I've actually had someone say that to me or it was along those lines. I'm always injuring myself in the kitchen, so why would I cook? Was sort of like
Right,
particularly with heat, like it wasn't
right.
very she didn't make very many things with heat. She would do a lot of salads or things like that, but not so much with that because she was always burning herself. And I'm like,
I had a chef instructor that said the more you burn, the more you learn.
that's so true. That's how we learn, right? We make
Yeah.
mistakes and we learn. So one more like thing question, but like, and I showed this to Leslie when we were offline, but like, she had mentioned the Betty Crocker cookbook in some preliminary conversation we were having, and I pulled out my mom's, which I still have, which I think is probably from about 1970 or 71. You can tell that there's now. I'm sure this was my dad who put the duct tape on the bind there to hold it together, and the pages are coming out, which is why I don't know exactly what year because it's lost the
Right.
right page, um, and it's a mess. But it was like such a nice little memory to look through that, and I learned how to cook on this cookbook when I was pretty little.
Yeah.
So it is a really useful. I had forgotten about it. Now I went back and I'm like, oh, there's a couple of things I haven't made in literally decades from there
Right.
that I'm gonna get around to. I think they were hot. They were things for more in the winter, but that I was thinking of. But I'll make those in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So, what other like cookbooks or maybe food besides your own food blogs,
Right.
or places to look for recipes when people are doing that planning part?
So I do love the Betty Crocker cookbook, especially for beginners, because the recipes are very basic. And what I really love about the newer cookbooks is they have pictures. One of the things I've learned in teaching is there are a lot of vegetables that and fruits even that people cannot identify. Like, they don't know what it looks like in its unprocessed form, so that the newer Betty Crocker cookbooks have those photographs in them. They
Mhm.
also talk a lot about the different cuts of meat and the ways that you should be cooking them. They have a glossary of culinary terms,
Mhm.
because I know when I was young, I did not grow up in a cooking family. I did not learn how to cook until I was 25.
Mm.
That's when I mean, I did some when I was a kid, but it was like, you know, spaghetti with a, sauce from a can or from a jar.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. So when I really started learning how to cook, I was 25. And I did when I was in it took me so long because when I was in my late teens, I bought a wedding gift for someone that was a cookbook. It was like a bridal shower gift or something like that. And I bought one for myself because it had the word basic in it. So I
Mhm.
thought it was a really simple cookbook, and it turned out not to be. And I didn't understand any of the book. I read the whole thing. I put it down and I cried because I didn't know what the authors were talking about at all. So what's really great about that Betty Crocker cookbook is it defines all of those big culinary words. It
Mhm.
tells you about the different cuts of meat. And, the recipes are very simple, they're very basic. And once you learn those, you can start experimenting and building. But
Mhm.
you should also look at the way you eat. If you are, if you're a vegetarian, then find those books that are written by subject experts. So I really prefer books written by subject experts over celebrity cookbooks.
Mhm.
I think we have a tendency to buy those celebrity cookbooks, but I really prefer, if I want to learn Mexican cooking, and there's, lots of great Mexican cooks out there, I'm going to learn from someone who, grew up eating and cooking that way. When I
Yeah.
travel, my souvenir to myself is always a local cookbook.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and some of
That's
them
a
are
great idea.
hilarious. I have one from, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago that I bought in Savannah that was written by the Junior League of Savannah. I mean, it's a great book to go through. So
Yeah.
yeah, look for subject,
Mhm.
um, those subject experts, and, look for, I'm seeing a lot of books now that are more about the way we cook now. I don't cook the same way that I did 10 years ago. And
Sure.
I certainly don't cook the same way that I did, 20 years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And all through it, because you mentioned vegan or vegetarian cooking, and I'm not a strict vegetarian anymore. I was for a lot of years, and I actually only discovered these cookbooks in like recent years. But they've rebranded recently, they're Bad Manners
Mhm.
cookbooks, which are really funny, by the way, because they swear a lot in them. So they're if you have little kids around, you might want to keep those cookbooks away from them. But
Yeah.
like, if you're worried about them with language, that is.
Yeah.
If they can read, I should say, if they're reading age. But they do what Betty Crocker does, I think, but for vegan cooking. They do a really, really good job in those cookbooks of saying this is, and especially because vegan cooking has some ingredients that people wouldn't use if you're not doing vegan cooking.
Right.
And they define that, and they're really good at saying, oh, make this really big pot of rice, and then you can make
Yeah.
these other meals. So I think they sort of do a little bit of what you're suggesting
Yeah.
in their cookbooks, and those have very standard became very standard very quickly. They also have a blog. You don't have to buy the cookbook. They have a blog with a lot of
Right.
offerings on there as well. So that's one that I've recently, maybe I've learned that one in the last 5 years or so.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
I do have one warning. I don't like to talk negatively, but I do have one warning, and I don't want to name the site, the website directly. I'll just say that it's known for having all of the recipes out there, all of the recipes. And the problem with having all of the recipes is that it also includes all of the really bad recipes. I know a lot of people who use that website. You know, Quite a few of my chef friends will use it as a reference site. Unless you are very good at picking out good recipes from bad, if you're a
uh,
beginner, stay away from that website, because I
okay.
will tell you that every single time that someone messages me or calls me, and I've had people calling me crying because they think that they're bad cooks. because
Yeah.
they're trying to learn how to cook, and they used a recipe and they say, I tried this and it didn't work out and it was so bad. And what did I do? And I'm such a terrible cook. And I'll say, send me the recipe. And they send me the link, and it's to the website that has all of the recipes. And I read the recipe and I'm like, it was not you. This is a terrible, terrible recipe.
Terrible recipe.
It is. There's a lot of really bad recipes out there. So,
Yeah, yeah, right. And if you, because I think I've had that experience on that or other websites too, where you're like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
yes.
And again, I've cooked long enough that I'm like, I'm not making that because that's stupid. But like, or I could do that better. Or sometimes I can take the recipe and say, oh, I'm going to do all those things, but not that or whatever. But if you're not familiar, you wouldn't know how to delete steps or
Right. And there are a lot of food bloggers out there. And I I get it. We all make changes to a recipe when we see it, but there are a lot of people out there who don't have the skill or the know-how, that when they change a recipe, they don't understand what they're changing. So, not to get too complicated, but recipes have components, and everything that a professional chef or recipe developer writes is in there for a reason. It should create balance in a recipe. And lots of times food bloggers will go in and they'll take things out or make substitutions without really understanding what the purpose of that ingredient was in a recipe.
Sure.
Because they just think, well, my family doesn't like that, or I think that ingredient is too whatever reason.
Yeah.
They make something out or they make a substitution without really understanding it. So that's why I say, I warn people who are just starting out, you're really a lot better off following professionals. Maybe not. There's a group on PBS, and I love those people, and they show you how to make these recipes. And they always show you the very best version of a recipe. But man, sometimes their steps are crazy. Even I'm like, I'm not gonna take 3 days to make that particular recipe. But it's because they're showing you the best version of the recipe. So find someone who is a really good chef, recipe writer, someone who has some type of experience, education, and follow that person. You're better off following one person and learning their philosophy at first, and then branching out once you understand, especially if you're just beginning. Because there's a lot of people who are really great people, but they just don't understand how to write a recipe.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, Leslie, speaking, you're one of those people. How do people find more about you?
Right. So I have a meal planning and cooking membership. I decided to go the membership route because food blogs are filled with pop-ups and ads and dumb stories. So, I mean, not dumb stories, but stories about people's lives. And we all know that we don't want to read those. Anyway, I have a meal planning and cooking membership called Life in the Feast Lane, and it's lifeinthefeastlane.com. We have a great group of people, all at different levels of cooking. You can come for the recipes, but stay for the cool people. They're the best people out there. I'm sure they probably right up there with your people as well. During the holidays, I also share not just recipes, but I also share cooking tips and baking tips and all that kind of stuff. And unlike the traditional food blogs, once you're in the membership, no ads, no need to jump to recipe, no pop-ups. Once a week, you get a meal plan. It comes on Thursday for the following week. You get a meal plan, 4 recipes. The benefit of the membership and the meal plans is that it not only gives you recipes for the following weeks, but it makes use of all of the groceries you're going to buy, so that you're not buying a bunch of groceries and then having a bunch of ingredients left over. Because we talked about leftovers in terms of once you've cooked something, but there's really nothing more annoying than buying a bunch of, meal planning, buying a bunch of food, and then having all of the ingredients left over. So, yeah. But if anyone has any questions, you can also reach me at info@thefeastlane.com. Thefeastlane.com and Life in the Feast Lane will both get you to me. So
cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with me. You've been looking at where to find more about me. This conversation with Leslie is part of my learning to, or loving yourself enough to say no. And again, we're saying no to hectic weeknight meals here, in this particular conversation. And there's lots more that we're saying no to, and saying yes to. We say no to things so that we say yes to other things. In this case, we're saying yes to tasty, easy, good things to make during the week, even when we're busy. So I want to thank you for being there, and you all can find more about me too. You probably have found me if you're here. So drop your questions. If you have further questions, we'll definitely follow up, and if you put those in the comments and chat. So I'm so glad that you were here. Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you all who joined me for this lovely, depending on your time zone, it's lunchtime for us, but for this little break midday. So thanks so much, and we'll see you again real soon. Oh, I have Defy the Trend Live again is on next Wednesday. That's the 16th. We'll see you soon.
bye.